What would you do if you discovered your family's past was built on lies? Would you dig deeper or walk away? The lights in the small gallery flickered dimly, casting long, restless shadows across the peeling brick walls. Outside, the coastal wind whipped mournfully against cracked window panes, carrying the sharp tang of salt and sea mist into the stale air. Emma Hughes stood alone under the pallid glow of a faded chandelier, her breath catching in a tremulous cascade. She was poised by her paintings, a spread of muted, haunting canvases that mirrored fractured skies and torn shores, but the room echoed with a haunting emptiness. Her heart thundered beneath the oversized sweater that swallowed her slender frame, the coarse fabric brushing against her skin like the weight of invisible chains. Emma's dark hair was loosely tied back, strands framing her face in soft disarray, her eyes wide and glistening, shimmering pools of quiet desperation. Tonight was supposed to mark her breakout, her first solo exhibition, but the shell of vibrant anticipation had hollowed into a cavernous silence. Beneath the stark white walls and the echo of absent footfalls, the sound of the distant sea gnawed at her resolve, waves clangorous yet callous, each crash a cruel reminder of her isolation. She scanned the empty room continually, hope dwindling with every passing minute. The faint scent of turpentine and old wood lingered, mingling with the salty chill, thickening the stillness around her. A sudden, tentative voice sliced through the quiet like a fragile thread. "Emma?" She turned sharply to see a shadow, a local artist who had promised to attend. His tentative smile faltered as he too absorbed the emptiness, the absence of others, the weight pressing down in that hollow space. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, glancing at the canvases. "I thought more would come." Emma swallowed hard, the bitter taste of humiliation bleaching her throat. It's okay," she whispered, voice breaking under the strain. "I guess I'm just not ready yet." She sank onto a battered wooden stool, fingers trembling as she reached out to touch the rough edges of a painting, an abstract swirl of grays and blues, a storm frozen in canvas. The brushstrokes felt like shards beneath her fingertips, sharp reminders of the dreams she had dared to paint. Her gaze drifted to the cracked shoreline visible through the grimy window, distant and desolate under a sky choked with pale clouds. The abandoned warehouses loomed like forgotten titans, their broken windows winking with the ghosts of stories left untold. The lighthouse, stoic and weathered, stood silent at the edge of the coast, a steadfast sentinel against the dark pulse of the night. It was a symbol Emma both feared and yearned for, a beacon for a path she could scarcely dare to take. Footsteps approached briskly outside, but slowed in hesitation. The gallery door creaked on its ancient hinges, and the well-dressed owner of the building peeked inside, her expressions lined with polite pity. "Emma, darling," she said softly, stepping into the dim space. "I'm afraid tonight hasn't brought the crowd you hoped for. Maybe it's not the moment." Emma nodded, her lips pressed tight, a hollow ache blooming in her chest. "Maybe." The owner's eyes softened, but nothing further passed between them. She left as quietly as she had come, the faint click of the door echoing in the cavernous silence. Alone again, Emma felt the suffocating grip of failure tighten around her. Her chest rose and fell with shaky breaths, the cold of the gallery seeping through her bones. The paint-scratched wooden floor felt unforgiving beneath her worn jeans. A breeze stirred the faint scent of salt and dust as the gallery's air shifted, swirling softly, carrying with it the distant, mournful cry of a lone gull above the ocean's restless surface. It was the sound of desolation, but also of endurance. Her fingers clutched the worn edge of her sweater as her eyes fixed on the spectral silhouette of the lighthouse beyond the window, an eternal witness to the storms of night and the promise of morning light. In the hollow silence, Emma felt a flicker of something buried deep beneath the sting of rejection, as fragile and undying as the flame of a candle flickering stubbornly in the dark. And with it, the faintest stir of hope. The cold light of morning filtered through the greasy windows of the small apartment, where dust motes drifted in slow, lazy spirals like drifting memories. Emma sat curled in a battered armchair, her frame tense beneath the oversized sweater that offered little comfort. The silence around her was sharp, too vast, stretched thin between the peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. The night's disappointment still clung to her like a heavy cloak. Outside, the wind carried the distant, relentless rhythm of the ocean, waves crashing on rocky shores, a sound that once brought solace now gnawed at the edges of her frayed resolve. The weight of absence pressed in a gathering storm within her chest where hope and despair tangled in dark embrace. Her fingers traced the faint creases of invitation cards discarded on the floor, remnants of a night that had promised much but offered little. Emma's eyes, usually so steady, flickered with unshed tears, silent testimonies to a mounting ache festering beneath practiced calm. She rose stiffly, pacing the narrow room, the worn wooden floorboards groaning faintly in protest. Angry thoughts fought to surface. Why did no one come? What if I'm not enough? Yet beneath the bitterness lurked a quieter dread. What truths lay buried beneath the surface of her family's shadowed reputation? What ghosts had always haunted the footsteps she tried so desperately to follow? Emma's gaze drifted towards a faded photograph on the mantelpiece, her grandfather's weathered smile frozen in time, eyes shadowed with secrets she had never dared to uncover. The image was both invitation and warning, a silent challenge she was reluctant yet unable to ignore. The room seemed to contract around her mounting frustration. Outside the window, a seagull created a forlorn wail against the gray sky, and Emma pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The world beyond was vast, indifferent, as desolate as the abandoned warehouses scattered along the forsaken shoreline. Her breath hitched. The slow burn of frustration fermented into a tight knot in her throat. The shy artist within, yearning for acceptance and understanding, wrestled with the restless daughter of a secretive past. Emma felt caught between two selves, fragile and fierce, each demanding acknowledgement. She sank onto the threadbare couch, the fabric rough against her skin, and exhaled a shuddering breath. Her hands found the worn edges of a leather-bound sketchbook, tucked beneath a scattered pile of magazines. Fingers trembling, she opened it to a page filled with half-formed sketches, shapes that whispered of broken doors, rusted keys, and the haunting silhouette of a lighthouse braving a storm. A sudden pang of longing surged through Hera, yearning to unlock something buried deep within her heritage, to shine light on truths wrapped in shadows and dust. In that quiet moment, as the waves whispered secrets to the shore and the lighthouse stood sentinel beyond the crashing tides, a fragile spark flickered in Emma's heart. Not yet a flame, but a glimmer-on invitation to step into the labyrinth of her past where answers cloaked in mystery awaited. A faint soundscrape of a chair, the soft thud of footsteps shattered the stillness. Emma looked up sharply, alert. But the room was empty, save for the drifting dust catching the weak rays of sunlight. Her lips pressed into a thin line, resolve hardening beneath the layers of doubt. The silence returned, but within it, a subtle change stirred, a promise whispered by the sea breeze and carried on the breath of the deserted town. Emma's gaze flickered once more to the window where the lighthouse's silhouette loomed against the sprawling gray skyboth, a marker of loss and a beacon of hope. Her fingers twined once again around the worn sweater's cuff, tightening as if grasping the slipping threads of courage. The path ahead was uncertain, woven with shadows and unsaid truths. But the first step had begun. The fading twilight clung to the edges of the coastal town as Emma crept softly through her late grandfather's home, the place heavy with dust and dim memories. The air tasted stale, thick with forgotten secrets and the scent of aged wood, damp plaster, and salt carried in from the shore beyond. The house stood like a wounded monument, its cracked windows bleeding the last light, casting fractured shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. Her fingers brushed over a stack of old belongings left in the corner of the parlor, the objects muted under layers of time, faded photographs with curled edges, brittle letters tied with frayed ribbons, and weathered books with cracked spines. She pulled gently at a loose floorboard near the hearth, the wood creaking like a quiet groan beneath her touch. A faint beam of light slipped through the cracks, illuminating a small, worn envelope, paper-stained, edges soft from endless handling. Emma's breath caught as she knelt, fingers trembling as she unfolded the fragile parchment hidden within. The handwriting was unmistakable, her grandfather's elegant script, the ink faded but still assertive. The words fluttered onto the page like whispered riddles, to Emma, who must unlock what lies beneath the surface of memory. The path forward is hidden where the old light fades. Trust only what is worn yet true. The room seemed to hold its breath, the creaking floorboards and distant crash of waves syncing with the racing pulse in Emma's chest. A surge of vertigo swept over her, a collision of fear and fierce longing. The envelope was more than a relic, it was an invitation and a challenge. She stood slowly, the weight of the moment folding into the battered sweater around her slender frame. Her eyes drifted upward, toward the silhouette of the abandoned lighthouse just beyond the windows, its paint peeling, glass cracked, but still steadfast against the relentless sea winds. It was a sentinel to the past, a keeper of light long extinguished but not forgotten. Emma stepped to the window, the cold pressing against the glass. Outside, the sky melted from dusky mauve to deep indigo, the first stars timidly revealing themselves. Her fingers curled tightly around the envelope and the rusty key that had gleamed faintly from the old jewelry box earlier, a small, cold emblem of possibility and unlocking. She knew this was no accident. It was a beckoning into the labyrinth of family secrets that had shadowed her life like a pale, persistent fog. Her reflection caught in the glass, fragile, mysterious, but no longer just a bystander to her own story. Emma inhaled deeply, the salting breeze stirring loose strands of hair around her face, mingling with the storm of resolve that was beginning to take root. The worn envelope, the rusted key, the steadfast lighthouse, all symbols converged at this precipice of awakening. With silent determination, she whispered, "It's time to find the light." Beyond the shadowed room, the wind carried an ancient song, soft but urgent, a promise that the path forward awaited discovery. And so, beneath the gathering stars, Emma's journey into the heart of her covert heritage began. The morning fog rolled thick over the coastal town, swallowing Emma's grandfather's abandoned house in a veil of whispered mystery. Emma stood at the threshold, her breath clouding in the cool, salt-infused air. Layers of sweat and grime clung to her oversized sweater as she pushed open the heavy oak door with a reluctant groan, the rusty key cold and heavy in her palm, the first tangible link to the past she had long avoided. Inside, the silence was an echo chamber of forgotten memories. The wood beneath her feet creaked unevenly, covered in a thin frost of age and neglect. Dust hung in the filtered morning light like tiny specters, swirling in the shifting beam from the cracked window. Emma's eyes traced the peeling wallpaper, faded floral patterns that whispered of warmth now buried beneath years of neglect. She moved cautiously through the rooms, fingers trailing over splintered banisters and cracked plaster. The house groaned faintly, as if exhaling secrets long kept hidden beneath its weathered skin. The sudden cold draft nudged at the edges of her thoughts, urging her deeper into this place where shadows of her family's history clung like stubborn ivy. Emma paused in a room stacked with crates and forgotten furniture, fragments of a life paused. She knelt beside a battered trunk, her fingers fumbling with its rusted latch. The hinges protested but yielded, revealing a jumble of rolled papers, faded photographs, and brittle letters tied in delicate bundles. Her fingers trembled as she lifted a photograph, the edges curling under her touch. A face stared back, an unfamiliar yet haunting presence, a lost relative whose existence contradicted every tale she had known. Christmas lights strung from a nearby warehouse blinked erratically through the murky window panes outside, their faltering glow casting fractured shadows that danced across the room. Emma's heart beat faster, a knot uncoiling, a mixture of fear and fierce curiosity. "Who are you?" she whispered to the picture, voice trembling with the weight of buried truths coming to light. The sound of footsteps outside startled her. Quickly, she hid the photograph beneath a loose floorboard, her breath hitching. The creaking doorframe caught light as the family lawyer, a thin man with calculating eyes, entered. His gaze swept the room with detached scrutiny. "Ms. Hughes," he said, voice low, warning edged beneath politeness, "I hope you realize some doors are best left closed. Your grandfather's affairs are delicate." Emma met his eyes steadily, the echo of her defiant spirit rising. "Delicate or dangerous?" The lawyer's mouth thinned, eyes flickering a brief flash of unease. "Not everything meant for revelation serves the living well." The words hung like a challenge in the breathless air. Emma nodded, steeling herself as the reality settled her quest would not be met with open arms, but with resistance and shadows far deeper than she imagined. Yet, the stirring within her faint but fierce refused to wane. The morning light shifted, casting long fingers across the worn floor, illuminating the worn envelope still tucked in her coat pocket. It was a tangible thread leading deeper into the family's web, a fragile beacon in the fog. Outside, the distant cry of a foghorn vibrated over the restless sea, its mournful call a haunting echo of Emma's own stirring resolve. She stepped through the open doorway into the mist, the cold crisp air a baptism, inviting her to shed doubt and embrace the path ahead. The lighthouse stood distant and stately atop the jagged cliffs, its silhouette cutting sharply against the thickening fog, a solitary monument to forgotten secrets and the stubborn light waiting to break through darkness. Emma's gaze fixed upon the tower, the rusty key clutched tight in her palm, as the dawn birthed shadows that seemed to stir with the promise of revelation. Her journey into the past had begun, uncertain but resolute, laced with the fragile hope that somewhere in the ruins lay the truth she sought and the redemption she craved. Emma's footsteps echoed softly on the creaking wooden floor of the abandoned house, each step cutting through the looming quiet like a shard of fragile resolve. The dusty beams of light that struggled through grimy windows illuminated the floating moats, creating a haze that made every particle seem suspended in time, a delicate liminality, caught between past and present. Outside, the ocean's relentless breath pushed restless waves against the rocky shore, a constant reminder of the turbulent sea of emotions churning within. Her hands were stained with old paint and splintered wood as she reached for another box of forgotten belongings, her fingers trembling slightly, partly from chill, partly from the growing weight of what she was unraveling. Each discovery was a double-edged sword, slicing through the comforting veil of ignorance while beckoning her deeper into the labyrinth of her family's secrets. The rusty key, clasped tightly in her palm, offered no easy answers, only a promise of locked doors waiting to be opened. It was both a lifeline and a tether to a past she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Suddenly, the sharp ring of her phone fractured the silence, a terse message from an unknown sender. "Stop looking. Some stones are better left unturned." The bare walls seemed to press closer, the air thickening as an icy shiver raced down her spine. Emma's breath hitched, a slow dread sinking into her bones. She stared at the screen, fingers suspended in uncertainty. Hours later, beneath the battered light bulb of a local cafe, she met Susan, an old family friend whose cautious eyes betrayed worry. "Emma," Susan whispered, voice low and tight, "people are watching. This isn't just about inheritance or old history. There are things, dangerous things your grandfather left behind." Emma's gaze hardened, her blue eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "I need to know the truth," she said, voice steady despite the cascade of emotions. Susan hesitated, then pressed a folded, worn photograph into Emma's hand, a stark image that sent a tremor through her. The faces were familiar yet distorted by time and secrecy. A relative thought lost, their existence challenging everything Emma had been told. The revelation thrust Emma onto a precipice, the ground slipping beneath her feet. Trust fractured around her friends whispered behind closed doors, the lawyer's cold demeanor grew darker, warnings tighter. Yet against the gathering storm, Emma found an ember of resolve kindling. Back in the crumbling house, night swallowed the sky as she stood before a stained glass window, shards fragmented like her thoughts, colors bleeding into the gloom. The lighthouse's distant silhouette loomed against the moonlit sea, a stubborn guardian of secrets and light. Her fingers brushed the worn envelope again, its creased edges now a lifeline woven with faded ink and whispered legacies. A sudden knock at the door shattered the silence, heartbeats echoing harder as Emma turned. It was Tom, a childhood friend whose hesitant smile barely concealed unease. "Emma, be careful," he cautioned, eyes scanning the shadows. "They're watching more closely than you know." She nodded, swallowing a surge of loneliness bitter as the night air. "I won't stop," she whispered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling loose shutters and carrying with it the distant, haunting toll of the lighthouse bell, a solemn call to those lost and those yet to find their way. Emma lit a single candle in the window, its flickering flame a fragile beacon against the gathering darkness. In its warm glow, the worn envelope and rusty key lay side by side, a silent testament to the journey now unfolding. Her breath steady, heart beating a fierce rhythm, Emma stepped toward the unknown, the door closing gently behind her, both a beginning and a warning. And somewhere in the shadows, eyes watched, waiting. Dust clung to the air, thick and dry as Emma closed the battered door behind her, the echoes of the creaking hinges falling like heavy footfalls into the stale silence. The abandoned house felt more like a mausoleum now, every shadow stretched longer, every floorboard groaned under the weight of secrets that refused to rest. The worn envelope still burned in her pocket, a silent, persistent reminder of truths that had only just begun to unravel. Her hands trembled slightly as she lit the solitary candle on the rickety table, the flickering flame casting dancing patterns across the peeling wallpaper. Face grandfathers, the lost relatives from fading photographs all haunted the murky corners, their stories whispered between the tremors of light and shadow. She opened the envelope carefully, drawing out a brittle letter whose ink had faded to a ghostly gray. Each curve of handwriting was laden with urgency and silence, a confession cloaked in riddles. The words hinted at betrayal, a fragmentary admission that a lost family member had been hidden away, shunned for reasons buried deep beneath layers of shame and fear. Emma's pulse quickened, a storm of emotions swirling in her chest: anger, sorrow, the aching quest for belonging now clouded by the heavy mist of lies. The room seemed to constrict, the walls closing in as the weight of the revelation pressed against her fragile resolve. A sudden knock jolted her from the abyss, sharp and unexpected. She hid the letter beneath a loose floorboard, heart hammering in a cacophony of fear and defiance. The door creaked open to reveal the lawyer's inscrutable face, his eyes cold and unreadable. "Miss Hughes," his voice was smooth, yet edged with a warning that seeped into the cracks of the old house. "Snooping around comes at a cost." Emma stood her ground, the flickering candlelight illuminating her determined posture. "Why are you trying to stop me? What are you afraid I'll find?" A faint, grim smile twisted the lawyer's lips. "Some truths are better kept in the shadows. You're meddling with a family history designed to stay buried." Her voice rose, steady despite the chill creeping through her bones. "I don't want to bury it. I want to understand it." He paused, eyes narrowing. Understanding isn't always a gift. It can be a curse. His words lingered in the cold air as he retreated, the heavy door closing behind him like a judge's gavel. Emma sank to the floor, the brittle letter pressing cold against her fingers once more. Her mind replayed the images of the lost relative, a face erased from family albums, erased from storylines, a ghost alive only in fragile paper and whispered tales. The key in her hand suddenly felt heavier, its rust whispering warnings, yet also beckoning courage. The lighthouse's looming silhouette, visible through the cracked windows, stood steadfast against the darkening sky, a sentinel guarding lost truths and forgotten promises. Emma's breath came in ragged surges as a profound clarity emerged from the tempest of doubt. The legacy she had inherited was stained, shadowed by betrayals so deep they threatened to fracture everything. But beneath the pain, beneath the fear, a sharp flame kindled, the fierce, unyielding resolve to unearth the full story, no matter the cost. Outside, the wind howled through the battlements of abandoned warehouses, echoing the turmoil inside her. The sea crashed relentlessly against the shore, a wild, untamed hymn. Emma rose, the candle sputtering as drafts swept through the house. In the flickering light, her shadow stretched long and gaunt across the floor, a silhouette bent but unbroken. This was no longer just a search for inheritance or recognition. It was a reckoning with the past, a battle to reclaim identity from the ruins of silence. And as the last candle flickered low, a cold draft slipped beneath the door, carrying with it the haunting cry of the lighthouse's distant bell. The resonance thundered in Emma's chest. She clutched the rusty key once more, the worn envelope folded beneath her sweater. Whatever waited beyond that door, forgotten, hidden, forbidden, was now hers to unlock. The relentless drizzle seeped through the cracks of the old house, tiny droplets tracing morose paths down the shattered glass of the windows. Emma sat huddled on the floorboards, knees drawn close to her chest, the worn envelope folded and creased in her lap like a fragile remnant of hope now fraying at the edges. The room was cold, the chill washing over her skin, deeper than the night's mist creeping inside an aching coldness that clung to her bones. The sea outside matched her mood, a dark, boundless expanse, waves slapping angrily against jagged rocks, the wind howling like a lament carried from forgotten ghosts. The lighthouse stood stoic in the distance, obscured by sheets of rain and the cavernous fog, a grim sentinel, distant and unreachable. Her eyes, once bright with promise, were now hollow wells of exhaustion and disbelief. She stared blankly at the scattered photographs, revealing faces she had hoped to forget but now haunted her relentlessly. The lost relative she had uncovered was no mere family secret. The weight of their absence now twisted into a suffocating tapestry of shame and grief. Emma's fingers trembled as they traced the edges of the photographs, the images blurring into tears unshed, her breath shallow and erratic. The once familiar threads of her family's history unraveled quickly beneath her touch, revealing sharp contradictions, hidden betrayals that cut through her core like shards of broken glass. A distant knock at the door jolted her momentarily from the spiral. She didn't move. The sound was followed by a threadbare voice, a reluctant visitor who carried the cold certainty of unwelcome news. Yet Emma remained silent, retreating deeper into herself, the walls closing tighter. Memories of the lawyer's cold warning echoed in her mind, his voice laced with menace, a final barricade erected against her desperate search for truth. The weight of his words crushed her. Some histories were better left buried. Her breath hitched as she wrapped her arms tighter around her thin frame, the oversized sweater offering little protection against the storm both outside and within. The room's shadows swallowed her almost completely, her silhouette a fragile echo of the woman she used to be. The flickering candle sputtered and died, plunging the space into raw darkness. Only the faint glow from the rainy window offered a dim halo, the lighthouse's Spartan beam slicing briefly through the gloom before fading like a dying star. Emma's lips parted, but her voice was nothing more than a whisper, a thistled thread lost in the roaring silence. What have I become? The desolation stretched endless around Hera Void, where hope dimmed, light retreated, and the fragile architecture of identity quaked on the verge of collapse. Her body sagged forward, the strain of betrayal pressing down like the suffocating weight of the coastal fog. And as the storm outside gathered strength, drowning the world in relentless rain, Emma sat alone in the engulfing void, her spirit fractured, a lighthouse extinguished behind walls of doubt. The slow unraveling had begun. The room was suffused with a heavy silence, broken only by the faint sound of rain tapping relentlessly against the cracked windowpane. Emma sat motionless in the corner, wrapped in the same oversized sweater, her knees drawn up to her chin like a fragile fortress. The dim light barely caressed her pale face, casting shadows that pooled like shadows of doubt beneath her eyes. Outside, the wind whispered mournfully through the deserted streets, as if echoing the hollowness that had taken root inside her heart. She held tightly to the rusty key she'd found days ago, its cold weight grounding her even as the walls of her world crumbled. The key offered no comfort, only a bitter reminder of doors locked away for reasons she neither fully understood nor dared to face. The worn envelope, once a symbol of possibility, lay forgotten on the floor beside her, its edges now curling like dying leaves, its message fading into the darkness. The photographs she had uncovered earlier stared back at her from the table, broken family smiles fractured by time and betrayal. Faces once familiar now felt alien. Secrets once hidden now exposed, raw and bleeding. Emma's breath caught in her throat, the silence pressing heavily as past and present collided with unyielding force. Her fingers absently traced the edges of the envelope's faded corners, a fragile act amidst the overwhelming void. The walls seemed to close in, shadows creeping across the floor like tendrils of despair. The only light came from a dying candle flickering with a ghostly breath, its feeble glow barely staving off the engulfing darkness. Emma's lips parted, a whisper so faint it merged with the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Why? The answer lay silent, the house itself seeming to hold its breath, a mausoleum for forgotten truths and shattered dreams. The storm outside intensified, rain pelting against the glass with growing urgency, the wind howling like a dirge for what had been lost. She curled further into herself, a small figure swallowed by the oppressive stillness. Her eyes closed as the cold seeped deeper, the line between the room and the storm blending into one endless abyss. Memories of laughter, of light, flickered like distant embers, rapidly fading, extinguished by the burgeoning night. A single drop of water fell from the ceiling, splashing softly into a puddle of collected rain on the floor. The ripple spread outward, disrupting the surface tension and echo of Emma's fragile spirit shuddering against the tide of desolation. Time lost meaning. Moments stretched until breath was shallow and heavy, until hope became a ghostly shadow languishing in the corners of her mind. And as the candle guttered and died, so too did the last frail thread of defiance. In the suffocating darkness, Emma surrendered to the Silencian abyss where even tears dared not fall, and the light of truth seemed swallowed forever. The night was thick and suffocating, wrapping the old house in shadows that seemed to press into the very bones of the structure. Emma sat on the floor in the corner of the dimly lit room, the faint flicker of a single candle casting wavering light over her pale face. Her breath came slowly, uneven, blending with the hollow silence that filled the spacious silence heavy with grief and unanswered questions. Her hands rested on the worn envelope, its edges curled and softened from years of handling. She unfolded it with delicate care, the fragile paper whispering secrets she'd almost forgotten how to hear. The faded ink revealed a note, written in her grandfather's unmistakable hand. Words that felt like a lifeline in the darkness: trust the broken. They carry the key to truths unseen. A shiver ran through her, part sorrow, part awakening. The rusty key, cold and weighty in her coat pocket, suddenly seemed less a relic of the past and more a symbol, a promise of doors left unopened, answers waiting beyond shadows. With trembling fingers, Emma pressed the note against her heart, the candlelight catching the silver glint of the key, a stark contrast to the dimness all around. As she looked up, her gaze fell on the silhouette of the lighthouse through the cracked window, its distant light faint but resolute against the night's shroud. For a long moment, she simply breathed, tethered by the fragile threads of hope woven into that steadfast glow. Then a soft sound disrupted the stillness, a gentle rustle at the door. Emma's head snapped towards the noise, heart quickening as a folded piece of paper slid beneath the threshold. She reached for it with cautious fingers, unfolding a note as delicate as the one before but laden with urgency. Keep seeking. The past is never truly lost. The words ignited something within her, a spark of courage flickering amidst the ruin of despair. It was a call, a whisper from an unseen ally, a beacon in the engulfing dark. The storm outside softened. Rain tapped gently against the window, a lullaby amid the chaos, as if the world itself exhaled in quiet solidarity. Emma rose slowly, the worn envelope in one hand, the new note in the other, and the rusty key glinting like a talisman in her pocket. Though the path ahead was still shadowed and uncertain, a fragile resolve took root in ember ready to blaze. She moved toward the window, eyes fixed on the lighthouse standing like a lonely guardian against the vast, dark sea, an enduring symbol of guidance and hope. The candle's flame flickered once more before steadying in the soft draft, joining in the silent vow. Emma whispered into the gathering dawn, "I will find the light." And as the night surrendered to the first sighs of morning, the shadows began to retreat. The dawn crept slowly over the jagged coastline, casting tentative rays that filtered softly through the cracked windowpanes of the abandoned house. Emma sat on the worn wooden floor, the chill of the early morning seeping into her bones, yet something new stirred deep within her, a fragile tenderness breaking the shadowed hold of despair. The room, once suffused with the oppressive heaviness of secrets long buried, now seemed bathed in a gentle pale light that softened the weariness etched on her face. Dust particles floated in the air, catching the first golden glimmers like tiny suspended worlds of possibility. Her fingers, still calloused and trembling from weeks spent renovating the old home, traced the outline of the worn envelope once more. It rested beside her, an anchor to the mystery that had upended her life, now less a weight and more a symbol of fragile hope. Emma rose slowly, moving toward the window where the gray silhouette of the lighthouse stood stoic, weathered, yet defiant against the glowing horizon. The beacon's beam, faint but steady, traced arcs across the distant water, a rhythmic promise amidst the soft crash of waves below. She breathed in the salt-kissed air deeply, the sound of the sea mingling with her measured exhale. Life pulsed quietly around her, slow resurgence of color in the sky, the distant cry of a gull nesting stubbornly among the abandoned docks. The world was waking, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt the pull not of retreat but of return. Her heart was still heavy, scars of recent pain etched deep beneath soft skin, but the tight knot of despair was loosening, unraveling into something akin to resolve. The relentless storm inside was giving way to the fragile calm after the subtle but undeniable breath of rebirth. A sudden ripple of movement at the door startled her. Tom stood in the half-light, a subtle softness in his gaze that spoke of understanding without questions. Without words, he stepped inside, offering quiet companionship. Emma's lips curved faintly. "It's a beginning," she whispered, voice rough but unwavering. Tom nodded, his presence a silent promise. She turned back to the lighthouse, eyes lifting to the steady beam. "Light survives the longest nights," she murmured. The key in her pocket felt warm against her skein, a tangible talisman of the doors yet unopened, the truths waiting to be discovered. Each moment was a small step forward, a delicate stitch mending the frayed fabric of her spirit. As sunlight pooled across the cracked floorboards, dancing in the glinting dust, Emma allowed herself to envision a path beyond shadows, not just toward answers, but toward healing. Her fingers tightened around the worn envelope. "I'm ready," she breathed. And as the first full light of day spilled through the window, washing the room in gold and promise, Emma took her tentative first steps into that dawn, fragile but fierce, a soul beginning to reclaim its own light. The gray dawn had given way to a pale but determined morning light that spilled reluctantly over the craggy coastline and the crumbling edifices of the forgotten town. Emma stood at the threshold of the abandoned family home, her breath steady despite the swelling tempest of emotions that churned within her. The rusty key seemed to hum in her grasp, a small, steadfast beacon anchoring her to this fragile new resolve. Behind her, the house lay eroded by time and neglect, shadows lingering in its broken corners like secrets reluctant to be unraveled. Yet now, in her eyes, it was more than ruin. It was a battleground, a sanctuary, a crucible where truth might finally be forged. Emma's steps were slow but purposeful as she moved through rooms layered in dust and whispered histories. Her fingers brushed over old wood, worn wallpaper, and the faded remnants of family portraits whose faces seemed both familiar and elusive. The weight of discovery pressed heavy, but the spark of clarity shone brighter than ever. Suddenly, soft footsteps echoed behind her. She turned sharply to find the family lawyer standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but the steel beneath his gaze unmistakable. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a cold calculation, a challenge. "Miss Hughes," he said smoothly, voice low but edged with a sharpness that prickled her skin. "You tread where others fear to. But some truths come at too high a price." Emma met his eyes, her own steady and unflinching. "What you protect is not just a legacy, it's a cage. And I intend to open the door." The lawyer's lips twitched, an unspoken warning. "Be careful. Your family isn't what you think it is." She nodded slowly, the edges of a defiant smile touching her lips. "And neither am I turning back to the shadowed depths of the house." Emma pressed forward, guided by the worn envelope and the secrets it concealed. Each creak of the floor, each whisper of the wind through fractured windows, wove tense symphonies of anticipation and dread. Later, as the sun climbed, Emma stood in the dim glow of her grandfather's study, the walls lined with dusty books and faded maps. In her hands was a startling photograph, an image that shattered the tidy legends she had known. The lost relative, once a shadow in whispered stories, materialized as a tangible link to a hidden truth that demanded reckoning. Her breath caught. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the weight of betrayal settled around her shoulders. Friends she believed steady had voiced doubts. The lawyer's veiled threats lingered like poison. But beneath the suffocating tension, a fierce resolve bloomed. "No more hiding," she murmured, voice barely above the breeze that stirred the curtains. "The truth will see the light, even if I must be its bearer alone." The distant lighthouse's beam swept over the shoreline, a lighthouse once silent, now awakening a symbolic pulse of endurance, persistence, and hope. Emma stepped outside, the breeze tugging at her sweater, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the promise of change. Her eyes lifted to the towering silhouette of the lighthouse against the shifting sky. She closed her fist around the rusty key, its cold bite now a promise of unlocking more than rooms. It was a key to her past, a gateway to her future. As the first faint rays fractured through the curtain of gathering clouds, Emma felt the fragile yet fierce thread of transformation run through her veins. The path was strewn with shadows, but her resolve shone clear-bold, unyielding. And beneath the endless expanse of sky and sea, she took the first step forward into the storm of truth, into the light of her own becoming. The dawn spilled gold and rose across the weathered shore, its warmth unveiling the contours of a landscape once shadowed by secrets and silence. Emma stood beneath the steadfast gaze of the now restored lighthouse, its light piercing the fog like a beacon of redemption. The air was still but alive with the whispered tales of the sea and the soft rustle of awakening leaves, elements woven into the tapestry of her heritage and healing. Her breath was slow and steady, equal to the rise and fall of the tide that sang at the cliffs below. The metal, once just a worn relic resting heavy on her chest, now shimmered with a brilliance born of truth uncovered and burdens unshackled. Fingers curled around it, Emma felt the weight transform, no longer a chain of hidden pain, but an emblem of hard-earned clarity. Every scar etched on the lighthouse's stonework reflected her own journey, cracked but enduring, weathered yet resolute. As morning light pooled around her, it illuminated the depth of transformation carved into her slender form, the quiet fortitude replacing the fragile despair once etched deep into her eyes. The house behind her, once a prison of forgotten memories, now stood reborn under pale sunlight, windows glinting, walls healed, stories reclaimed. Emma turned to face the path leading into town, a road once fraught with mistrust but now threaded with tentative acceptance. She spoke softly, more to herself than anyone else. All the shadows have their moment to fade. All secrets find their dawn. A breeze swept the salty air gently through her hair, carrying with it the scent of salt and earth, the ancient melody of waves kissing weathered stones. Nearby, the community began to stir, faces she once feared had turned with knowing smiles, silently acknowledging her victory over silence and fear. A child's laughter echoed faintly, a note of renewal in the quiet morning. The lawyer's silhouette approached slowly, no longer adversarial but subdued, the lines of resistance softened in the light of truth laid bare. Their eyes met not in confrontation, but in respect, a tacit acceptance of the past's debts now repaid. Emma's voice was calm, unwavering. The past is ours to face, not to flee. In truth, there is freedom, and in understanding, there is peace. The lawyer inclined his head, an unspoken truce bridging the fractured legacy. His retreating figure was swallowed by the morning haze, a reminder that even the darkest foes might fade when exposed to light. Emma's gaze drifted once more to the lighthouse, its beam now casting steady arcs across the ocean, a symbol of illumination for all who seek truth in darkness. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the shore in radiant warmth, Emma felt the final threads of her old self unwind, replaced by a fierce, unwavering purpose. She was no longer the timid artist, overshadowed by secrets and shame, but a woman reborn, a guardian of stories, a bearer of light. Her eyes held the calm of the sea and the strength of the stone beneath her feet. The journey was far from over, but the battle had been won. Emma turned, the salt wind lifting her hair as she stepped forward, each footfall measured, deliberate, the glow of dawn illuminating a future reclaimed. In her hand, the metal caught the sunlight once more, no longer tarnished but gleaming, a radiant testament to the power of truth to heal and transform. And as the day unfolded, she stood ready, calm, unshakable, a lighthouse herself for those lost in shadows, a beacon inviting the world to find its way home. The horizon burned with soft, amber hues as the evening sun dipped gently behind the distant hills, casting a warm glow over the quiet coastal town. Emma stood on the weathered pier, her silhouette drifting softly in the gentle breeze that carried the salt and stories of the sea. Her hands, delicate yet firm, cradled the polished metaller family's emblem of truth and sacrifice. The metal gleamed faintly, reflecting the fading light with a tranquil resilience that mirrored her own journey. Her eyes, once clouded by doubt and shadows of the past, now held a serene clarity. The turbulent storm of betrayal, loss, and deception had finally yielded to the tender promise of acceptance. The lighthouse, once silent and abandoned, now stood restored, its light steady and unwavering, a beacon of healing echoing through the stillness. The town, once shrouded in mystery and silence, seemed to breathe with a new rhythm. The old warehouses and empty streets whispered softly of renewal, of truths uncovered, of memories reclaimed. Emma's breath slowed, a gentle exhale that carried the weight of her transformation, a quiet acknowledgement that peace was not the absence of struggle but the harmony that emerged beyond it. In the soft glow of twilight, she turned her gaze toward the lighthouse, its steady beam guiding her along the path she'd fought so fiercely to find. The worn envelope, pressed against her heart, now lay silent, its secrets unraveled and its shadows dispelled. She took a step forward, every movement deliberate, each a testament to a soul reborn from ashes. Her fingers brushed lightly over the metal, feeling its coolness, a reassuring touch from her past, now a part of her future. A distant bell from the lighthouse tolled softly, a gentle reminder that the journey was complete but the story continued. Emma's eyes shimmered with quiet gratitude and hope, a glimmer of light in the depths of her soul, a legacy of truth, of love, of resilience. As she paused, her figure silhouetted against the glowing sky, the world seemed to hold its breath in a moment of profound stillness. The horizon stretched endlessly, promising new beginnings and the quiet, enduring promise of peace. The soft, golden hues of the sunset bathed the quiet town in a tender glow, stars beginning to flicker shyly in the twilight sky. Emma stood at the edge of the old lighthouse, its once dilapidated form now restored, a symbol of resilience and healing. Her silhouette was calm, a gentle figure against the vast horizon, her face turned toward the horizon as if listening to the silent stories of her ancestors whispered across the waves. In her hand, she held a small, worn photograph, the image that had once contradicted everything she believed about her family. Now, it was a relic, a piece of her puzzle decoded, a fragment of truth finally embraced. Her eyes sparkled with quiet understanding, tears shimmering briefly before falling in slow, measured drops, tears not of sorrow, but of release. A light wind played against her skin, carrying the scent of salt and earth, a scent of origins and rebirth. The waves crashed softly below, their rhythmic murmur a lullaby of time and continuity. Emma's gaze softened, her breathing deep and steady as she let the moment flower within her, a silent acknowledgement of the journey completed. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, feeling the warmth of the setting sun seep into her bones, radiating acceptance and forgiveness. Her hands rested gently over her heart, her fingers lingering on the metal, now imbued with a new purpose, a testament not just to her family's past, but to her own strength and newfound peace. The lighthouse's beam swept across her face, steady, unwavering. In that glow, her reflection shimmered, a mirror to her transformation, from a seeker shrouded in shadows, into a guardian of truth and hope. The world around her, harbor, sky, and sea, seemed to pause in a collective breath, acknowledging her surrender to what was, and her readiness for what would be. The town's hushed silence was filled with the gentle hum of acceptance, a testament that every ending is a quiet beginning. Emma turned slowly, her steps unhurried but filled with purpose, toward the welcoming lights of the town, a community woven together by shared pain and healing. As she moved along the familiar path, a flutter of memory stirred a glance back at the lighthouse silhouetted against the last rays of sun. A faint smile touched her lips, tender and profound. And in the stillness, the horizon swallowed her silhouette, leaving only the glowing lighthouse, a silent guardian of her new beginning, shining steadfast in the dusk as the world finally embraced the truth she had fought so fiercely to find. The soft hues of dawn unfurled across the horizon, spilling gentle light over the quiet town that Emma now called home. The once silent lighthouse stood transformed, its battered silhouette now gleaming softly in the morning light, a bastion of resilience and hope. Her figure, illuminated by the rising sun, moved with unhurried grace along the worn paths leading to the harbor, every step a silent affirmation of the peace she had forged within. The sea, calm and endless, stretched out before her, its surface shimmering with the tender glow of first light. The salt air was pure, invigorating, a balm for a soul long burdened by secrets and shame. Emma paused, her gaze drinking in the expansive horizon, where sky and ocean met in a quiet embrace. The lighthouse's steadfast beam reached into the morning, a symbol of enduring strength and guiding light. She clutched the metal close, its surface still cool beneath her fingertips, yet now it radiated with a new purpose, no longer a relic of shadows past, but a testament to truth uncovered and pain transformed. The worn envelope, the rusty key, and the battered photographs all found their place in her heart's quiet symphony, their stories woven into the fabric of her rebirth. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore played a silent lullaby, a hymn to the resilience of memory and the promise of renewal. Emma's eyes shimmered with a calm, unshakable resolve, their journey from darkness to light complete, her spirit anchored by understanding and forgiveness. In her mind, she saw the lonely lighthouse glowing steady against the vast, awakening sea, a beacon not just for ships, but for those lost in the darkness of their own histories. Her shoulders relaxed, every syllable of her breath a toast to the peace she had earned. The quiet was deep and abiding, a sacred space between past wounds and future hopes. Emma's silhouette stood still, her face serene, one with the dawn's tender embrace. The wind caressed her hair, gentle and persistent, a whispering promise that even in silence, life continues, endless and eternal. In that moment of profound silence, everything felt unified: the sea, the sky, the lighthouse, and the woman whose heart had finally found its home. The horizon beckoned with quiet reassurance, a reminder that peace is not the absence of struggle but the harmony born of truth and acceptance. And as the sun climbed higher, shedding golden light onto the world, Emma's gaze lingered on the lighthouse, a silent sentinel guarding her newfound serenity. The meditative pause stretched infinitely, the scene dissolving into a shimmering tableau of hope, resilience, and the gentle unfolding of a well-won peace. What would you do if a letter could change your future? Share your thoughts below.